They told you the relationship was your fault. They told you that you were too sensitive, too needy, too much. And somehow, at the same time, never enough. They dismantled you so slowly, so methodically, that by the time you realized what was happening, you had already forgotten who you were before they arrived. You had already started to see yourself through their eyes, and their eyes were not kind. Their eyes were a weapon. But here is what they never told you. Here is the part that changes everything. The person who made you feel the smallest you have ever felt in your life was not operating from a place of power. They were operating from a place of terror, a quiet, ancient, bone-deep terror that has been running their entire life, like a program they cannot see and cannot stop. Every manipulation, every silent treatment, every explosion of rage, every moment they made you doubt your own memory. None of it came from strength. All of it came from fragility so profound that they built an entire false identity just to survive it. That false identity is called the narcissistic ego. And today you are going to learn exactly how it works and exactly how to dismantle it. Not because you want revenge. Revenge keeps you tethered. Not because you want to hurt them the way they hurt you. That road leads nowhere you want to go. But because the moment you truly understand the architecture of the narcissistic ego, the moment you see what it is made of, why it exists, and what it cannot survive, you step outside the cage entirely. And a person standing outside the cage is not someone a narcissist can control. A person who sees clearly is the one thing a narcissist's entire psychological system was not built to handle. So let us begin at the foundation. The narcissistic ego is not arrogance. I know that is what it looks like from the outside. The grandiosity, the cattlement, the casual cruelty, the way they move through the world as if other people exist primarily as props in their story. That looks like confidence. It looks like someone who thinks very highly of themselves, but that reading is wrong. And that misreading is precisely what keeps so many people trapped in these dynamics for years, sometimes for decades. The narcissistic ego is not an inflated self. It is a substitute self. It is a fabricated identity constructed in early life to compensate for a wound so deep and so old that the narcissists themselves may not even have conscious access to it. Something happened to them. The details vary. Sometimes it was a cold or absent parent. Sometimes it was conditional love that taught them their worth was entirely dependent on performance. Sometimes it was something darker. But the result is the same. The normal psychological development that allows a person to feel inherently worthy, that internal foundation that lets someone sit with failure, tolerate imperfection, feel emotion without being destroyed by it, that development was interrupted. It never completed. And in the place where a stable, integrated self should have grown, a void opened up. Not emptiness in the poetic sense, a functional void, a structural absence, and the mind, in its extraordinary desperation to survive, built something to cover that void, a mask, a performance, a character so convincing that eventually even the person wearing it forgot it was a costume. That is the narcissistic false self. That is what you were dealing with. Not a person who was too powerful to be challenged. A person who constructed an elaborate fiction about their own power specifically because underneath the fiction, there was nothing stable at all. This is the first shift in understanding that you need to carry with you because everything else depends on it. A narcissist does not abuse you because they are strong. They abuse you because their survival, their psychological survival, depends on controlling the environment around them and the people inside it. They cannot self-regulate. They have no internal mechanism for managing their own sense of worth, their own emotional state, their own identity. That has to come from outside. It has to come from you. Your attention, your admiration, your fear, your grief, your anger, all of it feeds the machine. All of it keeps the false self running. That is what you were to them, not a partner, not a person, a power source. And the moment you understand that, the entire dynamic inverts. Because a power source that becomes aware of what it is powering does not have to keep the lights on. In this video, you are going to learn 6 specific, psychologically grounded ways to destroy a narcissist's ego. Not through confrontation, not through cruelty, not through any action that costs you your own integrity. You are going to learn how to withdraw, how to stand still, how to grow, how to hold truth, and how to become precisely the thing a narcissist's psychological system has no answer for. A person they cannot reach, a person they cannot move, a person who looked directly at the architecture of their manipulation and refused to be impressed. By the time this video ends, you will not just understand what was done to you. You will understand why you were targeted, what the dynamic was actually feeding, and exactly what you can do starting today to collapse it, not from the outside, from within your own psychology, from the inside of your own healing, because here is the truth that the narcissist never wanted you to discover. Their ego was never invincible. It was never even strong. It was a structure built on the assumption that you would never see through it. And you are already seeing through it. You have been seeing through it. That is why you are here. Stay with me, because what comes next is not just information.
It is the blueprint for your return.
The first way to destroy a narcissist ego is something that sounds simple when you first hear it. It sounds almost too passive to be powerful. But when you understand what it actually does to the narcissist's psychological system, you will realize it is not passive at all. It is the most aggressive move available to you, and it requires no confrontation whatsoever. It is called radical detachment, and it is going to rewire everything. Not the kind of detachment where you tell yourself you do not care while your hands are still shaking when their name appears on your phone. Not the performance of indifference while your nervous system is still organized entirely around their next move. That is not detachment. That is suppression with a different label on it. What we are talking about is something far deeper. A genuine neurological autonomic shift in the way your entire system relates to this person. A shift that goes below thought, below decision, below willpower, all the way down into the body where the bond actually lives. To understand why this matters, you need to understand what the narcissist actually did to your brain. The relationship you're in was not simply painful. It was chemically engineered, not through any deliberate genius on their part, but through the natural mechanics of how the narcissistic behavioral pattern interacts with human neurobiology. The cycle you experience, the warmth, then the withdrawal, the idealization, then the devaluation, the moments of extraordinary connection, followed by coldness that made you question whether any of it had been real. That cycle was not random. It was functionally a variable ratio reinforcement schedule. The SA, me psychological mechanism that makes gambling compulsive. The same mechanism that makes certain apps impossible to put down. The unpredictability of the reward is precisely what makes the bond so consuming. Your brain did not fall in love with the narcissist. Your brain became addicted to the pattern, to the hope, to the mope, to the memory of how good it felt at the beginning, and the desperate neurochemical belief that it could be that way again. That is why leaving feels like withdrawal. Because it is withdrawal. The bond is not primarily emotional. It is biochemical. And detachment is not a decision. It is a practice. It is a daily, sometimes hourly, act of redirecting your nervous system away from the source of that chemical dependency and back toward yourself. Every time you stop yourself from checking their social media, a neural pathway weakens. Every time you resist the pull to send the message you have been drafting in your head for 3 days, the grip loosens slightly, Every time you feel the urge to find out what they are doing, who they are with, whether they have moved on, whether they miss you, and you redirect that energy back towards your own life, your own body, your own present moment. You are engaging in an act of genuine neurological recalibration. The brain rewires through repetition. That bond was built through repeated activation. It is dismantled the same way. This is not soft advice. This is neuroscience in practice, but here is the part that makes detachment devastating to the narcissist specifically, rather than simply healthy for you. The narcissist's ego runs on emotional supply. We will go deeper into supply mechanics later in this video, but for now understand this: the false self cannot self-sustain. It requires constant external input to maintain its coherence, attention, reaction, engagement. Even negative engagement, your ang, or your tears, your attempts to make them understand, all of that registers as supply. All of that tells the false self that it still matters, that it still has reach, that it still has power over you. Your emotional availability is their oxygen. And when you detach, truly neurologically, not as a performance, but as a genuine internal shift, you cut the oxygen supply without saying a single word. You do not need to announce it. You do not need to send the message explaining that you are done, that you see through them, that you have finally figured out what they are. The announcement is itself supply. The explanation is supply. The confrontation they provoke you into because they can feel you pulling away. That is them desperately trying to get you to provide the one thing that detachment denies them. Proof that they still exist in your emotional world. Silence is not weakness. Silence, in this context, is precision. When you go quiet, when you stop reacting, when your energy simply stops arriving, they feel it. Not because you communicated it, because their psychological survival system is exquisitely sensitive to the withdrawal of the resource it depends on. And what happens next is deeply revealing. They will escalate. They will provoke. They will reach out with something designed to pull a reaction from you, cruelty or sudden warmth, or a piece of information they know will destabilize you. All of it is the same thing. All of it is a junkie looking for a hit. All of it is the false self gasping for the input it can no longer access. And every time you hold a detachment, every time you let the provocation land and then let it pass without feeding it, the false self cracks a little further. You do not have to destroy them. You just have to stop building them. The practical work of detachment is not glamorous. It is removing them from your social media, which, without making an announcement about it, it is not reading the message they sent at 2 a.m. designed to reopen the wound. It is choosing again and again to put your attention on your own life rather than on the story of what they did to you, because the story, however justified, is also a form of supply. As long as they are the central character in the narrative running through your mind, they still have the throne. Detachment is the act of removing them from the throne, not in anger, not in drama, in the quiet, irreversible recognition that the person sitting there was never real to begin with. They were a projection, a performance, a carefully constructed fiction that needed your belief to survive. And you are withdrawing your belief completely, finally, without apology. That is the first way. And it is the foundation upon which every other method in this video is built. Because without detachment, without this fundamental reorientation of where your energy is going, the other 5 methods are just techniques. With it, they become a complete psychological architecture for your freedom. Hold on to this. Because the second method is where things get truly interesting. The second way to destroy a narcissist's ego is through the establishment of boundaries so clear, so consistent, and so utterly immovable that every time the narcissist encounters one, they are forced to experience the single most destabilizing reality their psychological system cannot process. The reality that they do not have control over you, that there is a line inside you they cannot cross, that there is a version of you they did not create and cannot edit. Boundaries, in the context of narcissistic dynamics, are widely misunderstood. Most people think of a boundary as a statement, a declaration, a conversation you have where you explain what you will and will not tolerate, and then wait for the other person to respect it. And in a healthy relationship with a person who has the capacity for genuine empathy and mutual respect, that process can work. You communicate. They hear you. Adjustments are made. That is not what you are dealing with. With a narcissist, the moment you explain your boundary, you have handed them the blueprint for dismantling it. Because a narcissist does not hear a boundary as information about your needs. They hear it as a challenge, a negotiation opening, a problem to be solved. They will ask why. They will tell you your boundary is unreasonable, cruel, a punishment, a sign of your own damage. They will reframe your self-protection as an attack on them. They will tell you that someone who truly loved them would not need such rigid rules. They will find the one vulnerability in your explanation. The place where your justification is slightly soft, slightly uncertain. And they will push there, precisely there, until the boundary bends. This is why you do not explain. This is why you do not justify. This is why you do not enter the conversation at all. A boundary is not a sentence you say. It is an action you take. Repeatedly, consistently, without drama and without negotiation. If you said you would leave the room when the conversation became cruel, you leave the room, not after one more attempt to make them understand, not after you've made your point clearly enough to feel satisfied. You leave. If you said you would not respond to contact after a certain hour, you do not respond. The phone sits there. The message stays unread. The silence holds. If you said the relationship was finished, it is finished. There is no meeting for closure. There is no phone call to check in. There is no slow drift back into their orbit because the grief became unbearable and they sent something that sounded like the person you first fell in love with. Every time you hold a boundary, every single time, something happens in the narcissist's psychological system that they have no prepared response for. The false self operates on a foundational assumption. That assumption is that it can always find a way through, that there is always a lever, a button, a wound, a memory, a fear that can be activated to bring you back into compliance. The false self has been using that assumption its entire life. It has been confirmed thousands of times. Every person who eventually gave in, every boundary that eventually bent, every no that eventually became a yes because the pressure was too sustained and the cost of holding the line felt too high. When you hold the boundary and the lever does not work, something in the narcissist system short circuits, not immediately, not dramatically at first, but each time the assumption is proven wrong. The false self is forced to confront something it was architecturally designed to never have to face. The possibility that it does not have power over you. And if it does not have power over you, it has to sit with itself alone. Without the regulation it gets from controlling your responses. Without the confirmation of its own significance that comes from being able to move you. And sitting with themselves is the one experience a narcissist has spent their entire life engineering elaborate ways to avoid. This is why boundaries are not just self-protection. They are, at the level of the narcissist's psychology, genuinely destabilizing. Each enforced boundary is a mirror that reflects back the truth their false self cannot absorb. You do not matter to me the way you need to matter. You do not have the access you have claimed for yourself. The story you tell about your own power is not the story I'm living inside. Now, the hardest part of this is not understanding it intellectually. You understand it. The hardest part is holding it when the pressure arrives. And the pressure will arrive. A narcissist facing the withdrawal of control does not quietly accept it. They escalate. They will try every tool in the arsenal. The rage, the charm, the sudden vulnerability, the tears, the version of them that looks exactly like the person you fell in love with, because they know that version is the one most likely to make your boundary dissolve. They will tell you that you are being cold, unforgiving, that the person they knew would never treat them this way. They will manufacture crises. They will recruit other people to apply pressure on their behalf. They will find every possible angle of entry. Your only job is to keep the door closed. Not with anger, not with lengthy explanations of why the door is closed, just closed. The strength of a boundary is not measured by how forcefully you defend it. It is measured by how consistently you hold it when no one is watching and the pull to let it go is strongest. There is a specific moment that every person in this process eventually encounters. A moment usually in the middle of the night or in some quiet, unguarded hour when the grief of holding the boundary feels larger than the pain of what the boundary is protecting you from. When the loneliness of the line feels worse than the chaos that existed before it. When the thought arrives very quietly that maybe you are being too rigid, maybe there is room for one more conversation, maybe this time will be different. That moment is the test. And passing it is not about willpower. It is about memory. In that moment, you go back, not to the good times. Your brain will take you there automatically, and it is not a reliable narrator. You go back to the specific, concrete, documented reality of what the pattern looked like, not the exception, the pattern. Because the narcissist is not offering you a new relationship. They are offering you a new entry point into the same one. Hold the boundary, not for them, not to make a point. Hold it because every time you do, you are not just protecting yourself from them. You are teaching yourself at the deepest possible level that your word to yourself means something, that the promises you make to your own well-being are real, that you are someone who can be trusted to take care of yourself. That self-trust is what the narcissist spent years eroding. Every boundary you hold is a brick in the foundation they demolished. And brick by brick, that foundation returns. The third way is coming. And it is the one that will make the narcissist feel, perhaps for the first time in their lives, completely and utterly invisible. The third way to destroy a narcissist ego is emotional neutrality. And before you misunderstand what that means, let me be precise about what it is not. It is not coldness. It is not the performance of not caring while everything inside you is still burning. It is not the flat, hollow affect of someone who has shut themselves down so completely that nothing gets in or out anymore. That is not neutrality. That is a different kind of wound. What we are talking about is something far more alive than that. Emotional neutrality is the ability to feel everything you feel without transmitting it to the narcissist as usable data. It is the capacity to be fully present, fully aware, fully yourself, and give them nothing to work with. Because here's what the narcissist is actually doing in every interaction with you. They are reading you constantly, compulsively, with a level of attentiveness that can feel almost like intimacy until you realize what it is being used for. They are scanning for emotional data, for the micro expression that tells them they landed a hit, for the slight catch in your voice that confirms the comment about your appearance found its target, for the way your eyes move when they mention the person they know makes you insecure. Every piece of emotional information you transmit is immediately processed and filed, not because they care how you feel, because your emotional responses are the instrument panel that tells them how to navigate you. Your joy tells them they can elevate you and therefore control you through the promise of that elevation. Your pain tells them they can destroy you and therefore control you through the threat of that destruction. Your anger tells them you are still invested, and an invested person is a person who has not yet left the game. The only response that gives them nothing, the only response the false self has no answer for, is neutrality. The absence of readable emotional data, the face that reflects back neither triumph nor defeat. When you bring emotional neutrality into contact with a narcissist, something happens that is almost uncomfortable to watch, even when you understand exactly why it is occurring. They escalate, they push harder, they say something more outrageous, more cutting, more deliberately designed to provoke a reaction. They test the edges of your composure with increasing desperation, because your composure is not supposed to be possible. You are supposed to be reactive. You have always been reactive. Your reactivity was the proof of their power, the confirmation of their significance, the evidence that they mattered enough to move you. And now you are not moving. And it is making them frantic. That franticness is not incidental. It is diagnostic. It reveals the entire architecture of what the relationship was actually built on. They were never trying to connect with you. They were trying to activate you. The conflict was never about resolving anything. It was about emanating emotional output from you so they could use it for regulation. Your dysregulation was their stability. Read that sentence again and let it fully land. The times you were most distressed, the times you were crying, raging, pleading, collapsing, those were not failures of the relationship. They were the relationship functioning exactly as it was designed to function. Your pain was the product. Emotional neutrality shuts the factory down. Now, this is also the hardest of the 6 methods to sustain because your nervous system has been trained. The trauma bond is not just a psychological phenomenon. It lives in your body. It lives in the spike of cortisol when you hear their ringtone. It lives in the way your chest tightens when they use a particular tone of voice. It lives in the automatic preconscious activation of your threat response when the conversation starts to shift in a familiar and dangerous direction. You cannot think your way out of a physiological response. Willpower alone is not sufficient. What is required is genuine nervous system regulation, the kind that comes from consistent somatic practice, from breath work, from movement, from the slow and patient work of teaching your body that it is safe to be calm, even in the presence of someone who trained it to expect danger. This is not weakness. This is biology. And the path through it is not self-criticism for still being triggered. It is the daily practice of returning to regulation again and again without judgment until the gap between the trigger and your response begins to widen. Until you find one day that the thing that used to send you into free fall now lands with a dull, almost distant thud. Not because you are numb, because you are free. The 4th way to destroy a narcissist's ego is the one they truly cannot prepare for. It is your growth, your visible, undeniable, relentless expansion into the fullness of who you actually are without them. When the narcissist discards you, or when you finally leave, they construct a story. That story is not optional for them. It is structurally necessary. The story says that you were the problem, that you were unstable, difficult, broken, too sensitive, too demanding, that your deficiency made their behavior a reasonable response. That story is the load-bearing wall of the false self after the relationship ends, because without it, they would have to examine what they actually did, and that examination is not something the false self can survive. Your suffering after the relationship confirms the story. Your devastation is evidence for their narrative. But your growth, your healing, your thriving, your expansion into a life that is visibly richer and more alive than anything you had with them is a living contradiction that the story has no room for. If you were the broken one, why are you flourishing? If you were the unstable one, why does your life look more grounded than ever? If they were the superior one, the one who elevated you, the one you could not have survived without, why are you not just surviving without them, but becoming more fully yourself than you ever were beside them. They will not say this out loud. They will never give you the satisfaction of knowing how thoroughly your growth unsettles them. But it does. It gnaws at the foundation of the false self in ways that no confrontation could ever reach, because confrontation they can deflect. Growth they cannot argue with. So grow, not as a strategy, not as a performance for their benefit or anyone else's. Grow because you were in psychological captivity for months or years, and your natural trajectory was suppressed, and now it is not. Go back to the goal you quietly abandoned because pursuing it made them insecure. Rebuild the friendship that were slowly isolated because your connection to other people felt threatening to their control. Invest in your body, your mind, your craft, your joy. Become, with full and unapologetic commitment, the person you were always becoming before they interrupted the process. The fifth way is the complete withdrawal of narcissistic supply, the total cessation of emotional output directed toward them in any form. No reactions, no responses, no conversations about them with mutual connections, no late-night posts that are clearly aimed in their direction. Total energetic withdrawal. Because as long as any part of your emotional life is organized around them, even in opposition, even in grief, even in anger, they are still receiving supply. The hate is supply. The obsession is supply. The inability to stop talking about what they did is supply. What starves them is your genuine indifference, not performed, earned. The indifference that comes on the other side of fully grieving the illusion of who you thought they were. And the sixth way, the final and perhaps most quietly devastating of all, is the unwavering possession of your own truth, not confrontation, not public exposure, just the private, unshakable certainty of your own experience. The refusal to doubt what you lived through, regardless of how many times it is rewritten, minimized, or denied. Gaslighting only works on a person who is uncertain about their own perception. When you know what happened, when you've done the work of documenting, processing, and trusting your own memory, the narcissist distortion field has nothing to attach to. They rewrite history, and you simply quietly know better. That knowledge does not need to be announced. It does not need to be validated by anyone else. It lives in you, solid and immovable, and every time they attempt to reconstruct reality around you, it holds. Our truth is the ground beneath your feet. And a person standing on solid ground cannot be pushed over. These 6 methods are not a revenge plan. They are a return to your own nervous system, your own perception, your own trajectory, your own life. The narcissist did not just take your time or your energy or your peace. They took the story you were telling about yourself and replaced it with theirs. Detachment, boundaries, emotional neutrality, growth, supply withdrawal, and the possession of your truth. These 6 practices are how you take the story back, not violently, not dramatically, paragraph by paragraph, day by day, choice by choice. The version of you that existed before they arrived is not gone. It was compressed. And compression, as any physicist will tell you, is just stored energy waiting for the conditions to release. You are creating those conditions right now. In this moment, in the decision to understand rather than simply survive, in the choice to see clearly rather than remain comfortably confused, in the quiet revolutionary act of taking yourself seriously enough to learn exactly what was done to you and refusing from this point forward to let it be done again. They needed you to be small. You were never small. You were held down. The hand that was holding you down has just lost its grip. What you do with the space that opens up is entirely, irrevocably, magnificently yours.